Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Torah study. We're learning Parshas, Chukas, the Parsha of the week. Chukas, which means the decree. Torah is a decree. It's something which we do not because it makes sense, but because that's what the King of the universe commanded us to do. The Creator commanded us to do it. It's not because we understand necessarily, but because of who commanded it. In the same way that if your wife asks you to do something, you don't have to sit down to a board meeting to discuss it. It's your wife. You do it because it's your wife. How much more so when the Master of the universe asks you to do something? You do it. That's Chukas. That's the meaning of the word Chukas. Good morning, Elaine and Winston. Let's go straight into it. In the Medrash, the oral Torah, regarding this week's Torah portion, Parshas Chukas, tells us, speaks about the clouds of glory that protected the Jewish people in their 40-year traveling through the desert. The clouds of glory, the miraculous clouds of glory, and that they were there in the merit of Aaron the high priest. These clouds of glory were unbelievable. They were like air conditioning that helped the Jewish people, be comfortable during the 40 years in the desert, protected them from enemies, flattened the mountains, filled up the valleys, chased away the snakes and the scorpions. It was unbelievable. It's just, it's like having your own private cruise ship, I guess. So those clouds of glory were there in the merit of Aaron. The miraculous water that they had, the water that came out of the rock was called the well of Miriam because it was in Miriam's merit. And the manna, the miraculous food, the bread that came out of heaven was in the merit of Moses. These were three amazing siblings. Moses was the youngest, Aaron was the second, and Miriam was the oldest. And in the merit of these three great righteous people, the Jewish people had their needs taken care of. Miriam was the well, Aaron was the clouds, and Moses was the manna. Now, when Aaron and Miriam passed away, now they predeceased Moses. He took them all the way to the edge of the promised land. But when they passed away, the clouds of glory and the well also disappeared. Now the Jews were in trouble. And that's in this week's Torah portion. But they returned, nevertheless, in the merit of Moses. Okay? Now, even though Torah is wisdom, as it says, for it is your wisdom and your understanding in the eyes of the nations, nevertheless, we don't call the Torah wisdom. We don't call it the book of wisdom. We call it the book of Torah. Torah means directive. Like a Mora. You know what a Mora is? A Mora is a teacher. So just like a Torah, so the Torah is not just a book of wisdom, it's a book of directives. This means that every matter in Torah, whatever is any narrative in Torah, is a teaching, is a guidance, always and everywhere in our daily living. What does this mean? That not only the mitzvahs in the Torah are part of Torah, not only the positive commandments, the 248 obligations, and not only the passive mitzvahs, the 365 prohibitions are directives for our lives, but even the stories in the Torah are a directive to our lives. That's what it means. Because also the mitzvahs were written not only in a way of command, but also the mitzvahs were written in a way of a narrative, of a story. Many of the commandments were written as a narrative. That Hashem was speaking to Moses, and Moses said it over to the Jews. And just like by the mitzvahs, which were written, the commandments that were written in a way of a narrative are an instruction to us. So too are also the stories themselves in Torah, are also directives and a part of Torah. This is why the Rambam Maimonides writes, and it also says in the Talmud, that there's no difference between these two verses in the Torah when it comes to holiness or when it comes to their relevance to us. The one verse is Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Very powerful verse. We learned about the concept of one God. That not only is God the only God, which is obvious, but also that God is one, that everything that exists is part of God. And therefore, Havaya and Elohim is one and the same, which means what we've learned before, that Mother Nature is a manifestation of God's infinity and not some sort of a separate entity. So that verse clearly is important. But then there's another verse in the Torah that says, the sister of Lotan was Timna. There was a character by the name of Lotan, and he had a sister called Timna. And you think, that is completely useless piece of information. Shema Yisrael is important. No. Tells us Rambam, Maimonides, and the Talmud that even though Shema Yisrael is one of the foundations of Judaism, and the narrative of the sister of Lotan being called Timna seems to be something which is purely historical and no relevance to our lives, seemingly, because it's just a story. Nevertheless, both of them are stories in the Torah, in the book of directives, of God's directives. And therefore, they both have inspiring messages to teach us all. And therefore, just like all other stories in Torah, the stories of the manna and the clouds of glory and the well of Miriam are also important stories for us to apply today in our daily lives, and not just things that we know as historical trivia, right? This is a groundbreaking concept that the Rebbe introduced to the world, that every single letter of the Torah is vital life guidance. And it really electrifies our study of Torah when we realize that this is not just a book. It's not just another book on the shelf. This is God's wisdom. God doesn't just say stuff. Everything that is written in the book of God is an unbelievable lesson. If you haven't seen the inspiration in it, get yourself a new rabbi or dig deeper. Okay, let's go into this. So these three concepts, the clouds of, good morning to you, Winston, David, and Lauren. Okay, these three concepts of the clouds of glory, the manna, and the well of Miriam, we understand are all part of Torah. The clouds of glory would protect the Jews from the outside. They would protect them from the weather. They would kill the snakes. They were in the desert. They would flatten the mountains. They would even launder their clothes. Did you know that? These clouds of glory served as laundry services. Like it says, your clothing did not, what's the word? Your clothing did not wither from upon you. Everything, all sorts of protections that the Jews needed, the clouds of glory provided them with. The manna was for food. So whereas the clouds protected them from the outside, the manna protected them, fed them on the inside. You know, the manna would taste like, you know what it tasted like? Whatever you wanted it to. Anything you wanted it to. You wanted Parmesan, you wanted fettuccine Alfredo, whatever. Taste whatever you wanted. It was a miraculous food. Okay, obviously that applied to the inwardness. The well of Miriam, the water, is not something which sustained them in and of itself. It's not food. That's why the Maimonides states, that water doesn't have the same legal status as food, right? What does water do? Yeah. What it actually does, according to Maimonides, is that the water is what channels the food to go into all parts of our body. So it's the flow. That's what keeps you alive. It's the flow. Without it, you get parched and nothing moves, right? Let me just finish this. And that's same. And within Torah, we also have these three concepts. There's the part of Torah which applies to our inwardness, like food, like the manna. There's the part of Torah which protects us from the outside, like the clouds of glory. And there's the part of Torah that connects the two with all Jews, like the water that flows to every part of the body. Yo, you going to say something?
You can live longer without food. You can without water.
Right, because water is the flow. Yeah. What's more important, your plumber or electrician? Right, plumbing is more important. Yeah, okay, got it. Fine, very good. Now let's see how far we can go with this. So we spoke. So the Rebbe is saying now, and I'm freely translating. The Rebbe says we spoke earlier that Torah is a teaching. It means teaching. It means directive. This means that Torah teaches us how we should live our lives. That's what Torah does. This is what we mean when we say that Torah influences our inwardness, like the food. Like food. We have to understand this, Torah, and we have to apply it inwardly. You can't just look at the bookshelf and say, oh, I have Torah. You have to really ingest the wisdom to know how to behave, your family, and your legacy. From this perspective of Torah, which is like the manna, there's differences between different kinds of Jews. Because since this is an element of inwardness, everybody customizes it to their own level, to their own inwardness. Everyone's different. Just like the manna, there was differences between different classes of Jews. There were those that received it ready-made. There were those that received it in powder form that needed to still be baked, right? It depended on your level. There was also the food, whether it was put outside of your tent or you had to go out and get it, was depending on your righteousness level. Yeah, so there were different levels with regard to the manna. So by a tzaddik, a righteous person, the manna was ready, and by the wicked, it wasn't ready. Not so was with the clouds of glory, that everybody was uniform. The clouds of glory protected everybody uniformly. There wasn't any customized differences between the clouds of glory like there was by the manna. Because the manna is something which applies to our inwardness. Same thing with Torah. There are some people that fulfill the mitzvah of Torah study, by just reading Shema in the morning and in the evening. If a guy is so incredibly overwhelmed with work that he literally doesn't have 5 minutes a day to study Torah, he can technically fulfill his obligation by saying Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad in the morning and saying it at night. That's the bare bones. And there are those who study Torah an entire day. Everyone's customized differently. Same thing applies to the beautification of the mitzvahs. There's different standards of beautifying the mitzvah. Kosher, for example, some people will beautify the mitzvah of kosher by being more meticulous. Other people will be less meticulous. That doesn't mean you're being lazy or not lazy. It means that you're being more stringent with more subtle differences. Right? So you're being more stringent with more subtle differences, right? So a regular person. Okay, whatever. All right. Now another thing which is in Torah, which is similar to that was one element of Torah which is similar to the manna. So there's element of Torah which is how we apply it to ourselves, how we choose to exercise the Torah with regards to the fulfillment of the mitzvahs. There's different levels. That's the Torah the way it's similar to the manna, where each person is different because it's ingested. Then there's the way the Torah is similar to the clouds of glory, which is more of a uniform way. And the way that it protects us from outside harm. When we have to go out into the desert, which is a metaphor to the great wild west out there, the great outdoors, right? When you have to go face the world, a world that is called in Tanya, a world that is filled with klippa, superficiality, and sitra achra, forces that attempt to oppose God's unity. What's described as a wild and fearsome desert, which is parched from any water. It's only filled with superficiality, with snakes and scorpions and vipers. How do you protect yourself from that? For this, how do you protect yourself from being devoured alive? For this, what you need is self-sacrifice. You need to be able to come out and say, "How now, brown cow? I am going to make it to Shul with Shabbos. I'm going to get out of bed, no matter what I face. I'm going to go late to tefillin. I'm going to make sure that I order the kosher food or go to a kosher restaurant." Right? In other words, that takes guts. It takes courage, character. Now, this is uniform by all Jews. If you're going to face it, we all face the same struggles. I mean, some more, some less. But if you're going to fulfill those mitzvahs, you're going to have the same self-sacrifice, the same devotion. Right? And this is representing, or this is the manifestation of the clouds of glory in our daily divine service. That just like the clouds of glory then surrounded the Jews, all Jews together, from the time of the crossing of the Red Sea until they arrived in the Promised Land for 40 years later. These clouds of glory surrounded all the Jews, the good, the bad, and the ugly, including a Jew who had the audacity to carry with him an idol across the Red Sea. Can you imagine? God is literally ripping open the Red Sea and he's carrying an idol with him. Can you imagine somebody who would do that? Can you imagine? No? You can't imagine? I can imagine. I see people every day that experience miracles and they stubbornly refuse to accept the fact that God has blessed them. They actually attribute their success to their own genius. They actually convince themselves that they're so incredibly smart, so much smarter than all the rest of the human beings of this earth. They actually generated this wealth on their own, or this success, or this power or influence on their own, without attributing it to God. I mean, that would be the equivalent of carrying an idol across the Red Sea. God is ripping open the Red Sea before you, and you're saying thank you to your idol. In this case, God is making miracles for you, and you say you're worshiping your own ego. Right? So even such a Jew is embraced by the clouds of glory uniformly. Like the previous Rebbe told the story, that when the bombs were thrown in Warsaw, many people ran to hiding. In one case, a group of people gathered together. The Rebbe, ordinary people, simple people, including people that thought that they have no connection to Judaism. They were all huddled up together. Yet, when at one point they heard a bomb very close to them explode, they all together said, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. From the Rebbe to the average Jew, to the simple Jew, to the heretic Jew, all of them said Shema Yisrael together. This is a uniformity. This is a devotion that all Jews share, different to the previous application of Torah, which is custom. Because when you talk about self-sacrifice, and you talk about the essence of a Jew, which can most often be revealed at a time of life and death experience, then even your heretic apostate Jew is going to say Shema Yisrael. There's no atheists in foxholes, right? It could even be that the reason why these heretics declared Shema Yisrael is because they were within the proximity of the Rebbe, of the previous Rebbe who was right there next to them, the previous Rebbe. Okay, fine. Now, in order for every Jew to have the manna and the clouds of glory, which is in Torah, so in order for every Jew to be able to apply and experience a custom level of Torah, as well as a uniform level of Torah, that is through the water. You need the water. Remember we said that the two are connected? How does the clouds of glory, the outside, impact your inside? That your outside influences penetrate to every, permeate to every cell. That's through water, right? So for this, you need to have water. In order to be able to really live as a Jew, you need to have the water element of Torah. What's water? Water is something which goes from a high place to a low place, like a waterfall, and it doesn't change. So too, Torah goes from a very high place, from God Almighty, down to us, and it doesn't change. It's an amazing thing that everything else, light dissipates with distance. Water doesn't. Water flows from high up down to very low. It doesn't dissipate. It's an extraordinary quality of water, which is why Torah is compared to water. Because when we study Torah right here and now, we're actually studying the same wisdom of God Almighty. Okay? It's described in Tanya as majestic wisdom in a disgusting vessel. It's like, imagine an amazing food that's being served in a dog dish. That's the Torah that comes down to this world. Through this Torah, through the Torah's descent, when a Jew reads words of Torah, even if he doesn't understand the meaning of the words, right? If he just reads the meaning, if he just reads the words of the written Torah without even understanding, or if he reads the oral Torah, the Mishnah, the Gemara, right? And and there at least he has a basic understanding of Torah, then he's able to access the manna and the clouds of glory in Torah. So in other words, the water element of Torah is the descent of Torah. So when you literally read the words of Torah, you sit in Shul on a Shabbos and you follow along the words of the Torah reading. Now, when it comes to written Torah, you don't need to understand to be fulfilling your obligation. When it comes to oral Torah, which is explanation, you have to at least understand the basic understanding. So when he does that, then what's happening is you're connecting with the water element of Torah. And just like water draws the nutrition to all corners of the body, to every cell of the body, so with the water of Torah, that means that the Torah descended down to this world. What it does is that it encloses the manna element of Torah and the clouds element of Torah to every Jew, to everyone individually, and draws to him all the blessings that he needs in every respect. So far, so good. You with me so far? Yeah? Okay. With this, we can understand also why the manna is connected to Moses. We have to understand why the clouds are connected to Aaron, why is the water connected to Miriam, and why is the manna connected to Moses, right? Moses is the shepherd of Israel, he's the Rebbe. He fed the Jews, nourished their faith, each one to his own level, like it says. How did Moses get to the burning bush? He was a shepherd in Midian, in Jordan, Saudi Arabia area. And there he was, and there was the little sheep that ran away. So he chased the sheep for a long time. I can't remember how many days he chased them. Maybe 40 days he chased the sheep. Until eventually, this little baby sheep, he finally caught up with it, and it was at the burning bush. Also, he made sure to give the small sheep I guess the soft grass. He gave the bigger sheep thicker grass because he was customizing the needs of each of his flock as a shepherd. Because to be a shepherd is to be able to relate individually to each of your constituents. And this is why the manna is related to Moses. Because the manna is customized. It's the Torah, the way it goes to every part of the body. Every person gets a different level, a different amount. Aaron, on the other hand, was famous for his unconditional love of his fellow Jews. It says in the oral Torah that Aaron would love every single Jew by virtue of him merely being chosen by God to be created. Can you imagine if you had that attitude? You know, we often say about people, oh, I don't have no use for that person. I don't like that guy. What have you done for me lately? Hello, God chose to put that person on this earth. You know what that means? It means that God gave him his vote. That's what it means. The least you could do is respect the guy for that. So Aaron was famous for his unconditional love of every Jew. Even those people that were merely, they're no merit other than the fact that they were created. Nothing else to speak for them, about them. He still loved them. Therefore, it says about Aaron that when he died, all of the Jewish people, men, women, and children, cried for him. It doesn't say that about Aaron and Moses, about Moses and Miriam. By Moses' death, only the men died because he was a teacher. Taught the men, I guess. But Aaron, the men and the women cried for him. That's because he showed everybody love. He brought out within them a love of mitzvahs as well, even though they might not have been holding on that level. But by him loving them, he aroused their love as well. And this is the reason why in his merit came the clouds of glory. Because everything in God's justice is measure for measure. Everything is reciprocal. God's justice is perfect. It's customized to your efforts. So God treats you in the way that you initiate. You write your own verdict. So Aaron, who was loving of everyone the same, what came in his merit was that which is uniform to everybody and not custom. And since he was a lover of Israel, of all creations, of all creations, it doesn't even say Israel, it says he loved everybody by merely virtue of being created. Therefore, he was the one that in his merit came the clouds of glory, which protected everybody equally. Finally, was Miriam. Miriam had another interest. She had another name. Anybody know who Miriam's other name was? What was her other name? Miriam was Puah. Puah. Shifra and Puah. We read about them in the beginning of the book of Exodus. Shifra and Puah were the midwives that Pharaoh instructed to murder the Jewish boys at birth. And they had the courage to defy Pharaoh's orders. So Shifra was her mother, Yocheved, and Puah was her. Miriam is Puah. That's her name. The Rashi says the reason she was called Puah is because she would coo the child. You know, there's the mothers that have a way of calming a child with coos, I think is the word. So Puah is like a word in which poo, it's like a manner of soothing the child, I guess. So so Miriam, her other name was Puah, which shows us that she was devoted to the upbringing of the little children in Egypt. Why was the name called Miriam? Because during her lifetime, when she was born really, was when the intensity of the slavery began. The Jews were in Egypt for 210 years, but only the last 86 years were slavery. That's when Miriam was born. She was the one that said that even though the Jews were in a bitter exile, the Redeemer of Israel has been born. This was what was ultimately going to turn around the decree of Pharaoh. It's one thing that she defied Pharaoh's orders to kill the children at birth, but it's another thing that she prophesied, and she actually facilitated the birth of Moses. She actually convinced her parents to get back together after they separated. Long story. And they conceived Moses, right? So she really was responsible for the redemption of the Jewish people ultimately. She was the one that went down with self-sacrifice, devotion, to prepare the children, to be able to be ready at the crossing of the Red Sea to say, "This is my God, and I will glorify him." Can you imagine? You're on the Red Sea. It takes vision to be able to stand up and declare, "Yes, this is my God." God doesn't reveal himself with in a hologram. You have to figure out his presence. I mean, if you saw the sea split before you, would you say, "This is my God, and I will glorify him"? You would? Has the sea ever split for you?
No.
Split for me. I've seen the sea split. I mean, not the water sea, but I've seen problems, evil people. I've seen my waves lift me up. I've seen God bless me in extraordinary ways. And I say, "This is my God, and I will glorify him." I don't want to be unconscious about the benevolence that God grants me. So it was Miriam who educated these children in the depths of slavery. She saved their lives at birth. She raised them with faith to the point that at the Red Sea, they were able to declare, "This is what Miriam has been talking about. Now we get it." She prepared the generation to receive the Torah. She facilitated like water. In her merit, therefore, came the well of Miriam, which is the concept of drawing forth and nurturing or extending Torah to a very low place. Just like water, we said, goes from a high place to a low place, right? Now, maybe tomorrow we'll finish it up by talking about what happens when Aaron and Miriam pass away. Why it is that they return in the merit of Moses, these two elements. These two elements return in the merit of Moses. We'll finish that up, God willing, tomorrow. But for now, we'll call it a day. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining me this morning. Let me know about your feedback on this style of Torah study, which I think is kind of interesting. Send me an email to rabbi@jewishguidance.com. Thank you all. Have a lovely day. Shalom.